How is everybody? The first thing I want to know is how many first-time Women of Power women are in the room?
Ooh, wow.
Wow. Look at this. Amazing. Well, you are going to have a treat this morning, another treat this morning, because haven't we had it already today?
Yeah.
So this panel is called Steady as She Goes. And it's really about the intention of doing what you do in your life and in your job. And we're going to spend a lot of time talking about the career, the intention of your career. And we have two phenomenal women with us today. And I'm going to take a minute to introduce them. Let me first mind my manners. My mother said people don't know who you are, so just tell them. My name is Pam Eel. I have been to this summit for at least 12 of the 14 years. That's why I know that it's amazing and y'all are really going to enjoy it. I am the former CMO of the National Basketball Association. Are y'all clapping because of the NBA or because I'm former NBA? Which one? But anyway, I recently retired and I'm telling you, that's the best job to have. But we are going to talk about intention and women and getting there. And these are two of the most phenomenal women that you will have ever met. Let me tell you first a little bit about them, and then we are going to have some questions from the stage. We're going to have a bit of a conversation. There are microphones. I'm going to ask you to go to the mics and ask your own questions. It's going to be very, very interactive. And Melissa in the back is going to tell us when to shut up. So until then, let's rock and roll, okay? It is Saturday morning, so these women have orange juice on the stage. How about that? You can tell a lie if you tell people it's a lie. That was a lie. Lisa Wardell. Lisa, President and Chief Executive Officer of Adalem Global Education. She is also a member of their board of directors. Lisa is the only African-American female CMO in the S&P 400 and the S&P 500 indices. Check that out. If you're not feeling inadequate already, let me tell you what else you need to know about Lisa. She has a bachelor's degree from Vassar College, a law degree from Stanford, a master's degree in finance and entrepreneurial management from the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania. And she's a member of the board of directors of Lowe's. Lisa, welcome. And have a drink of your orange juice, girl. You deserve it. Let me also introduce you to Tracy Travis. Tracy is Executive Vice President of Finance and Chief Financial Officer of the Estee Lauder Companies. Tracy is responsible for global finance accounting, investor relations, information technology and strategy, and new business development. She was previously the CFO of Ralph Lauren. She was also the CFO of the Limited Brands in Columbus, Ohio. She serves on the board of directors of Accenture. She also has a Bachelor of Science in Industrial Engineering from the University of Pittsburgh and an MBA in Finance and Operations Management from Columbia University. Dang, y'all. Here's the thing you need to know about these two ladies that's absolutely phenomenal. Lisa flew in yesterday morning from Brazil, and Tracy flew in last night, a 21-hour flight from India to be with y'all. Let's give it up for these ladies. Good morning, y'all.
Good morning.
Let's start this conversation, and I know the two of you are going to jump in. You know each other. You have this great chemistry. But Tracy, let me start with you. You work for Estee Lauder, actually the #1 prestigious beauty company in the world. Here's my first question. Do you get free makeup?
Oh.
And do you have something for us?
Well, first of all, the answer to that is yes. You all should have gotten a free Ruby Woo lipstick, MAC, in your bag. I have to tell you that that is one of our best-selling lipsticks. We sell 6 lipsticks, Ruby Woo lipsticks, every minute globally.
Wow.
So it's a hot ticket. You know, Estee Lauder Companies is a great place to be. And in addition to MAC, we have almost 30 brands. So brands like Clinique, Jo Malone, Tom Ford, Origins, Aveda, Le Labo, Too Faced, Becca. So it's a great place to be. We have a great portfolio of brands. A lot of you are probably familiar with Estee Lauder and Clinique and gift with purchase. So when you ask, you know, do we give free product? It's been the history of the company actually to sample our product because we know with the quality of our product, once you sample and try, you will buy.
Awesome.
So,
Tracy, let me ask you this. You have a very non-traditional career path. You went from finance to information technology to fashion to general management, and all of those are usually male-dominated industries, if we're going to tell it like it is on a Saturday morning, right? How did you do it, and how did you get right here today?
well, Lisa, actually I started in engineering, so very male-oriented in automotive. So I always say there's probably a book in me, not quite as great as Stacy's or the other that we heard earlier, but you know, from automotive to beauty and everything in between. And I was an engineer in the 80s at General Motors. I was the only female in my engineering department. I was the youngest by about 15 years, and of course I was the only African American. And it was a great experience. So I did that for about 5 years and then left and went to Pepsi, where I spent 10 years. Yes, Pepsi. 6 years in finance and strategy, and then 4 years as a general manager. And I always say that, you know, one of the pivotal roles that I've had in my career was actually transitioning out of finance and strategy for a period of time and doing a general manager role. It was the general manager of a bottling operation in, you know, in the middle of Michigan. It was typically Michigan, yes. I spent 11 years, lived in Michigan 11 years and met my husband in Michigan. It was, at the time, there were 3 other female general managers. So I was the 4th. I was, you know, certainly the only one that came out of a finance background. So it was a high-risk position. And I always tell young ladies that, you know, take risks, take career risk, because, you know, the times that I have done it, don't be afraid to fail. The times that I have done it has been incredibly rewarding. This was a market unit that was underperforming. It was one of the worst in the system, so we oftentimes get those chances when there's a turnaround opportunity.
And I spent
yes, nowhere to go but up, and that was exactly, Lisa. That was my philosophy there. So and really it was such an incredible, exponentially growth-oriented position for me. Up until that point, I had really done finance, I had done strategy, but I was managing a very diverse workforce, everything from route salesmen to my professional teams. I was managing a sales team. I had never done that before. I was managing a P&L and never turned down an opportunity to manage a P&L. And again, we turned that market unit around in the 4 years that I was there. So I proved I could do it. It also gave me diversity from a career standpoint. So now I had finance, strategy, engineering, and general management. And that allowed me to take broader roles going forward. My next role was a CFO role where I also managed IT. And then I took another CFO role with IT and strategy and business development. And so I, you know, really learned an awful lot through my career. In beauty, it's interesting that I actually ascended to the C-suite in those male-oriented companies, you know, and came into the beauty industry in a C-suite role as CFO.
And Lisa, speaking of moving up and getting into that C-suite role, you have had a very steady, impressive ride to the top of where you sit right now. And as far as I can tell, there's no other woman that has done what you've done. I gotta ask you, is it lonely at the top where you are? And if so, how do you deal with that?
Well, the short answer is yes, it is. But in some ways, it has created a new network for me that is just so incredibly supportive, right? And so Adtalem Global Education is a place that also needed a lot of turnaround. It was in crisis. I became the CEO there almost 3 years ago now. And at the time, there were just so many fires to put out and risks and things that needed to be managed, investors and all sorts of stakeholders, et cetera. And so you find yourself in a position where the buck stops with you. You're the CEO, and your peer set that you had before as an EVP and SVP in the C-suite. I was a chief operating officer before that. In the C-suite, all of a sudden can relate to some of the things that you were dealing with, but there are some things specific to the CEO role, much like CEOs who have their own businesses, entrepreneurs, same thing, where they just haven't had that either responsibility or experience. And so there is a piece of that role where you're always on. And so, and it's not just the CEO, CFO, the C-suite, you're always on. And all of a sudden you lose the ability to kind of talk to some of your peers about that because, they all report to you or, people on your board, but now you have these duties that you didn't have before. So I think, as Stacey Abrams was talking about in the last session, and note to self, don't go after Valerie Jarrett and Stacey Abrams, but I'm going to tell you right now, we are going to give some nuggets in this session that have not been given to date at this conference. You heard it here first, okay? They'll comment. But what she said about know who your friends are, and obviously different as you're ascending, and that kind of fame is a little different. And you do make new friends and networks, but it's those people who can, as she said, who care and really ask you how you're doing and what you need. But if you think about that in all of your careers, and as you're reporting to, whether you're reporting to the C-suite or you're reporting a couple levels down, if you translate that to how can I make my boss's life easier, you're going to see some advancement much more quickly, because the lens here is this person causing me to use more of my time somewhere that I don't, that's our greatest resource that we have to protect. More of my time than I should be on something, or are they helping to free up my time for me to do the things that only I, as the CEO, can do?
I know that both of you have already alluded to the fact that there are people that you need to talk to and people that you need in your corner. And I know that both of you also have very strong feelings about mentors and sponsorship. Talk a little bit about that, and we've heard a lot about that in the last couple of days. What kind of nuggets have you given to your mentees that you got from those who mentored you? And talk a little bit about those people who mentored you and how that's helped, both of you.
Yeah. Well, I'll start. I mean, I've been fortunate and have talked a lot about mentors and sponsors and the role that they've played in my career. So, one of the first things I got from a mentor who actually ended up being a sponsor was, don't be afraid to fail. If you haven't failed at something, you're not going to get as far as you can unless you take risks in your career. And the real, the real thing to know and to be able to do is to have resilience. You learn as much from what you didn't do as well as you had expected as you do certainly from what you have done well. So that was one of the things I think that early on in my career I learned and heard and took to heart. In terms of sponsors and advocates, I was fortunate in my career to have people who saw me in action. One of the things I did early in my career as well is expand my horizons, and this is another thing that I tried to counsel young women and others, some young men as well, in that make sure when you enter a new company or you're in a job that you're not only doing a terrific job at what you're doing, but if you have the capacity, volunteer and get exposure in other areas. So one of the things when I was at Pepsi, I volunteered for a number of task forces. And I got broader exposure in the organization, which meant I had broader advocacy. More people knew me when positions came available that could actually advocate for me. So that was important. That's another nugget that I learned from a mentor. And then a sponsor, who I didn't know was a sponsor at the time, she was the chief operating officer at Pepsi, and a group was talking about market unit general managers and candidates that could go into these positions. And they were talking about me in terms of the finance role that I was playing at the time. And she said, well, she sounds like she is broader than just a finance executive. If she's really partnering with you from a strategic standpoint and making your job easier as the CEO, and she has that much understanding about the business, could she actually be a general manager? Right. So oftentimes we're not thought about in that way when those conversations happen. And they said yes, and so that's how I ended up with the general manager role. One of the things that I certainly take as a responsibility in my role, because I am in the room when those conversations happen, is make sure I advocate for the young women, some of who are right here in the front row, from Estee Lauder, who have tremendous potential and can do other things in the company. And that's certainly a responsibility that I think we all have when we're in the room, whether it's in my role as CFO at Estee Lauder or in the boardroom as well.
Lisa, as you answer that same question, for the women in the audience, can Black women make it without having mentorship and sponsorship?
I don't think anybody can make it without having mentorship and sponsorship, depending on where you want to make it to. But if you've got a goal, certainly the C-suite is not going to happen, right? And I'm glad that you kind of rephrased the question there, because that's where I was going to go. I completely agree with everything that Tracy has said. And the one thing I will repeat, because you should write it down or type it in your phone, is P&L experience and general management experience really is one of the keys. It is not the only way to get into the C-suite, but it is one of the keys to driving advancement in really certainly corporation, in any industry. And a lot of it takes letting people know that that's something that you're willing to do, and being able to put yourself out there. But it is a big part of it. I thought that Carla and goodness, I'm forgetting now. Shelley, thank you. Yeah. Carla and Shelley did a great job of going through the mentor sponsorship. Absolutely. Everything they said about what you tell sponsors and what you tell mentors, all true. But I think there's a couple of other pieces that I would add. One of my mentors, and really sponsors, because he's also the CEO and chairman of the company I came from, of RLJ, is Bob Johnson. And there were a couple of things that he really taught me. One is something that we call the feedback loop, right? And self-awareness. And now in all of companies, Accenture and Pepsi and Adtalem, and I've got the Adtalem ladies are here too. Yeah, first hands. All of these companies now, pretty much you're getting feedback. It's not once a year anymore. People really try to make sure that you are getting feedback on projects, on task force, and that other people know you in the organization. But it's what we do with that feedback and the lens that we view ourselves through that really matters in terms of, so people can be giving it to you as much as they want, but unless you can take it and say, what am I going to do differently about this? It's not okay to say, oh yes, I can, I have this characteristic that people are telling you about it because they need it to change, right? Or they need you to at least be aware and be able to make that weakness into a strength, right? So that's the first. And then secondly, in terms of how people look at you or talk about you when you are not in the room. there are these skills, P&L, this financial or engineering, whatever your particular skill set may be. But at a certain level, the sort of equation shifts. It's absolutely true of board experience. So I will look to see if you agree with this, to relationship, soft skills, negotiation. Can you make people feel comfortable in a room? In a boardroom, it may be lots of older white males who don't have a lot in common with you. That's changing, but you're not going to be walking into corporate boards where, you know, there's one or two of them and everyone else is diverse for quite some time, other than one or two we heard about Best Buy yesterday from Rochelle. So you have to think about the feedback and how you present and how you show up in a room. The skill set, the P&L, all of those things are table stakes. And so I think that's a key message I would want to get across, because everybody here, the good news about that is everybody can work on that and you know, advance in those areas.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. You know, one of the things that you know, in terms of feedback that I would say that I've done throughout my career, I never wanted to be ruled out. So, you know, oftentimes, you know, unfortunately, people will look at you in terms of what you can't do. And so, you know, when you're in a role, whether it's the soft skills or whether it's the technical skills, you know, whether I was at, you know, General Motors, I, you know, made sure that I understood more broadly than just my role. I understood the car industry. So I could talk, even though I was, you know, a very junior person in the organization, I could talk strategically about the company and the industry. And I did that throughout my career, so that, you know, from a perception standpoint, you know, when higher level roles came you know, up, you know, I was able to, and I was viewed in that way because I spent the time and invested the time in really understanding more broadly than just my role. But the soft skills and the interpersonal skills are something that, you know, if you do have a good mentor and a good circle of friends that you rely on, can help you a lot. You know, I think, you know, Stacy and Valerie talked about that a bit this morning. So you want people in your circle that really care about you and that will tell you when you're doing something well and you're right, but as importantly, tell you when you're wrong and you need to change something. And I've been fortunate to have those people in my life. And, you know, as Stacy said, you know, those are people that have been in my life for decades. Some actually newer in my life. Yeah. I have to say that the sisterhood that is here and the sisterhood that I've felt throughout my career, where we have helped each other, has been terrific. And that's something that's incredibly important as well. So everybody in this room, it doesn't matter where you're at in your career, you can be a mentor to someone. And certainly if you're in a management position, you can be a sponsor of someone.
Great.
And I just want to pick up on one thing you said, which is, you know, when you're right and when you're wrong. And I just want to make a point that there's also a lot of times when you are absolutely right and it doesn't matter, right? You either I can't tell you how many times I've apologized for something that was not in any way my fault, but you know, you have to lead with you got to get people to problem solve. How are we going to fix this? And I don't mean doing that in any way that takes away from your authentic self or your values or morals. I don't mean that. But you know, a lot of times I will talk to usually women, but sometimes men, but folks earlier on in their career, and they're talking about someone in their department, you know, and it's so hard to work with that person, and or it could be more than one person, and you know, it's just so difficult, and what they're doing. And I said, you know, at the end of the day, all of that, let's say it's 100% true and correct. One, you are wasting your time, energy, and resources thinking about it. And two, the number of people who are, you know, generation annoying as you ascend your career just increase, right? They don't have to even work with you. They could be your investors. They could be, you know, that's not going to change. So what you want to change is how you respond and internalize or not internalize that. And you know, I think if we really spent more time thinking about that as a complex problem to solve versus whether I'm right or wrong, I think that would go a long way.
Well, I am sure both of you ladies are going to get more questions on mentoring and sponsorship, and you're probably going to have 200 additional people at the end of this wanting you to mentor them, so just be ready for that. Steady as She Goes is really a nod to longevity. So Tracy, as the CFO, I know the work is hard. I know it probably never stops for you. How do you keep yourself literally from wearing out?
Well, other than Starbucks,
And a lot of it.
and a lot of it, you know, as you indicated in your opening remarks, I just came in from India. It was 21 hours on a plane, you know, to get here. And, you know, and oftentimes, you know, with multiple responsibilities that you have, you know, certainly there's a lot to do, and you have to keep yourself energized. For me, I found it important, first of all, my team needs to be strong. And if I have a weak team, then I'm not going to have the energy I need to have, because I'm going to be spending time doing things that my team should be doing. So the first thing, and I'm fortunate now to have a strong team, so it allows me to do things like come here and do other things, do the board responsibilities that I have. The second thing that's important is having a support network. You know, I happen to have, you know, wonderful home life, wonderful family, and wonderful friends, and that's important as well to keep me energized. You know, my husband probably is tired, and we've been together for 30 years of me coming home and you know, expounding on my day. But you know, that's a venting for me, and he is incredibly supportive, and like my friend network tells me when, yes, you know, understand, or, you know, well, maybe you should look at that a little bit differently, to your point, Lisa. So, so that's important as well. And then take time for yourself. I mean, whatever, you know, I have a regular subscription to get a massage. I get massages regularly. I get my nails done regularly. You know, I know when I have reached a point where I need to just breathe. And that's important as well, to know that breaking point for yourself, and to take the time for yourself to re-energize. So those are all things that I try to do.
Lisa, talk about burnout. And talk about what you do in your spare time, because you have so much of it.
Well, I am blessed to be a tad high energy. I think there are people in the room that would attest to that. But it is definitely a cycle. And so I can sort of feel, you know, if I've done 2-3 weeks of, you know, just being on large meetings, board meetings, all of those things, I can kind of feel that coming. For me, I'm a runner, and so you know, exercise helps. I need to add the massage thing. Exercise helps, that kind of thing. But when I do that, I literally actually did it on the plane here, probably because I was like, missing the weekend. So all for a good cause. I will take my calendar and I will ruthlessly go through my calendar and say, how is this helping me with these 3 priorities that I have? And then I will move. I don't. I make my assistant call all those people.
Say that again so they can hear this. Say that again about that calendar.
Yeah, I take it. I send my assistant's name is Sarah. I send her an email on the plane. She's like, oh, it's one of those days again. And it had literally 18 things. I was like, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that. This person needs to do this. This person needs to do that. And let me know how it went. And I'm not traveling this. Trip to Cyprus. I was like, I can't go to New York, then Cyprus, then turn around and go wherever else I was going. And I will, and sometimes you can't do that. I have not yet called my board up and said, you know, this is not a good week for me. Called Marvin Ellison at Lowe's and said, you know, yeah, I'm not coming down this week for the board meeting because I'm on that board. But it is a habit, and you can do it whether you have an assistant or not, right? I don't care what your job is, you can do it in your mind and yourself. And I wish that I had learned that before. When I took this role, my current audit chair, very experienced, and he was CFO for many, many years. And he said, you know, you are great at time management. Nobody can be in the CXO suite without understanding time management. He said, but what you need time discipline. And those 2 things are very, very different. Time management, we all know, we multitask with the best of them, you know?
Yeah.
Time discipline, completely different. That is when you say, yeah, I do have to have a housekeeper and someone to cook. Like, I cannot be, I am
That's
super
awesome.
mom, but I'm in a cape flying around the house after Grace, not cooking, you know? If I'm ever in the kitchen, my teenage son's coming, they're like, you didn't cook that, did you? Like, it's like really rude. Because my husband—
Don't feel bad. My daughter say
My
the same
husband
thing. Dad cooks that, right?
Yeah, and I can cook, literally, I'm just sharing this little I can cook 3 things. Spaghetti, fried chicken, and peach cobbler. That's it.
All very good for you.
What else do you need?
What else?
What else do you need? It's about, thank you.
Great.
So when I get home from a trip, I try to cook, but it's got to be one of those 3 things, right? So I cook spaghetti, and my husband had cooked greens, kale and collards. He cooks really good greens. And my son Isaac comes in, he put a plate like this, right, 16 of the spaghetti. He takes the spoon, puts it in the kale, and he's like, oh my God, you didn't cook this, did you? I was like, no. He's like, oh, okay. You know, so that's I've let
great.
that go, and that's okay. But time management, time discipline, ladies, if I had learned that in my 20s or my 30s, I would have
No,
missed the moments.
I want to pick up on that because, one of the things I learned probably in the last 5 years or
Yes.
so is the discipline from a calendar standpoint. And it can get a little crazy, but then you've got to ream it back. I have blocked time on my calendar. And so
I do
my
too.
office knows blocked time, do not schedule anything, during blocked time. Because I need it. I mean, otherwise you end up with all of your time spent in meetings during the day and bringing home work and working all night. And that's not healthy for you. It's not fair to your family.
Right.
So block time is important. The other thing I try to do, at least every 3 weeks, is exactly what you talked about, Lisa, and that is go through my calendar and highlight, do I need to be at this meeting or can someone else be at that meeting for me? What are the real, and what am I missing? And really try to reorient the calendar to be as productive as possible. And that becomes, again, you talk about, burnout and the things that are really important, but time management, I couldn't agree more, is really, really key, the time discipline that your audit committee chair told you about.
I hope you could hear the nodding in the audience when
Yes.
y'all were talking about
Yeah.
time. I think
Yeah.
that's one of the biggest problems. But speaking of time, a couple of things. Get ready with your questions. If anyone has a question, come to the mic. There are 2 mics, one on each side, and as you're coming up, I want to ask this of both of you. It is also a time management question. Both of you have these amazing jobs, and then you sit on boards. And we heard Rochelle's panel talk yesterday about, there was a question for them about how do you manage both a big-time job and a board job? Why don't you talk about that and the discipline that it takes to do both of those?
Yeah, I'll start, and I will first start by saying for me, first of all, I'm on my board, that's, I don't get the same vote, let's just say that, so I don't count that, but I am on Lowe's Home Improvement, and it is critical for me to be on that board, because I have to continue to be able to think like the other side of the table. Rochelle talked a lot about the other side of the table, and so as you are thinking about, and I know a lot of people were talking about board service, I was in that session, make that a priority if you want to be in the C-suite or stay in the C-suite or wherever you are in your career, because that is how you learn management's responsibilities versus a board, and then also how people think about industries and change and that type of thing. And for me, Lowe's gives me a window into scale that is larger than Adtalem. But first of all, it's scheduled. You understand what your responsibilities are. And so that goes with kind of the time management piece. And then I think too, it's about making sure that everyone has the expectations. So when you're in there, you can't email, be doing your email from your day job kind of thing. Has your expectations that it's 2.5 days. And then you've got to put time before that on the Tuesday and on the Friday so that you can kind of catch up with the things that you've missed. But once you get into that cycle, it's worth it.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I've been on boards, public company boards for 15 years. and just recently joined the Accenture board. I was on the Campbell's Soup board, and actually my first board was Joanne Stores. And I was on that board for 8 years. We ended up taking the company private, but all of those experiences, to be on the other side of the table, to understand what governance is. I mean, one of the important things to understand when you're on a public company board is the difference between management and board and governance. And sometimes you have to lean in if the company is more challenged, but most of the time you have to lean out and make sure that management is doing what they should be doing, and the company is doing what they need to be doing from an investor perspective. So it is a time commitment, and you have to make sure that it doesn't conflict with our board meetings, and so there's the calendar management as it relates to that in terms of being able to accept a board position. It is an investment in time. I tell anyone, I was, my first board was a $1.5 billion company. Accenture is a $50 billion company. And so it's a time investment to make sure that you invest in reading the materials, invest in making sure you ask the right questions, and even between board meetings, make sure that you have some connection to know what's happening and what's going on in the company. But it's an incredibly rewarding experience. I have to say that the camaraderie that I've found has been one of the really pleasurable experiences of being a board member. You are, you're in a situation where you're able to develop a lot of great partnerships with your other board members if you're fortunate to have the kind of board experience that I've had. I'm also on the Columbia Business School board, which is, educational boards are a bit different, certainly than, and I think this was talked about yesterday as well. One is you get paid, the other is you pay to be on the board.
Key distinction.
Yes, so that, that one is, that was a very good and true statement. But, I've been on not-for-profit boards that I have, had to contribute to. Lincoln Center Theater is another one. I love the theater. And I love the artistic process. And so that is the reason why I'm on that board. And for Columbia, again, I love the educational process. Certainly Columbia was instrumental, I think, in my career. And I've also recently endowed a scholarship to support financial aid for women of color to be accepted to Columbia.
All right, we got quite the line.
So we have a lot of interesting questions. We're going to try to get to as many as possible. Please try to keep your questions as questions.
No appointments.
And brief. Let's start over here.
Good afternoon. My name is Patricia. I'm from New York City.
Hi, Patricia.
This
New York.
is yes, Brooklyn girl.
All
This
right.
is my first time
Yes.
here. I appreciate everyone, the people on stage and everyone that I've met so far. I'm here by myself. In 5 days, 12 hours, 9 seconds, I will be the first Chief Human Resources Officer at my organization. Thank you. I got the countdown.
Congratulations.
Waiting for that salary change. My question to you is, I know what to do in my profession, and I have mentees. I have mentors. No women of color. What do I need to do?
So people may not necessarily like this answer. My answer is that might be okay, because people who can influence and drive opportunities for you a lot of times are not women of color or black women. So that's the first. Not that you should obviously have, you want to have a mentor who looks like you, but I guess I say the first thing you should do is harness the power of the mentors that you have, because likely they've got networks and opportunities that you wouldn't have otherwise, right? That's why they're mentoring you. So I guess not like that part. But then in terms of black women, I think sometimes we have to come outside. I mean, entrepreneurs have to do this all the time, right? Because it's just them. We have to come outside of our organizations and think around either the industry or, you know, it could be a community service thing or something like that, where you're finding women who may not be doing exactly what you're doing, but, you know, they have a sense of all these things we've been talking about, sponsorships and time management, you know, events like this. You're at a perfect event right now, right, to make sure you make some connections. And also, the way that technology is now, it doesn't necessarily have to be somebody that either works in your office every day. I mean, one of my members of my personal board of directors sitting right there is Rochelle Parham, and I see her when I come here, and then we sometimes scheme to get on the same panels other places so that we can meet in other cities. And we're very good. We do the homework. But you know, my point is, you know, I can text or call at any time. So I would say, you know, broaden kind of the picture and then use the opportunities of what you have.
Yeah,
Awesome.
no, this is a perfect opportunity. So I hope you make some connections here because this is a fabulous group. So you couldn't ask for a better group to find a mentor relationship.
Right.
Let's go here.
Hi, my name is Nicole Bell-Simon, and I lead the global planning and financial reporting team for John Wiley & Sons Publishing Company, and I'm a proud PepsiCo alum.
All right.
So my question is, as you're executing on intentional leadership, what tools do you use to discern between, as you're communicating strategy or ideas, what tools do you use to discern between feedback that you should potentially consider to refine your strategy versus feedback that is really going to undermine what you're trying to deliver?
That's a very important distinction, you know, and that's something to learn early on. Sometimes we don't get feedback. So, you know, we talked a bit earlier about the importance of being able to accept feedback. You know, one of the things that is also, you know, very damaging is if you don't get feedback at all. And so you actually want to get feedback. But then it is important to understand the difference between constructive feedback and not constructive feedback. And so I always took feedback. I always asked for it if I didn't get it. But then I always did some self-reflection. Okay, so what part of this do I own? And what part of it, you know, doesn't seem right? And if the feedback seems to be not constructive, ask some additional questions. Just to probe it a bit. But no, it's important to know it's important to know that not all feedback is going to be constructive feedback. But if you can extract constructive feedback, and I always do the self-assessment in terms of is this really, and you have to have a comfort level with yourself. You have to be able to say, I could have done that better. And feedback is an opportunity to learn and grow and get better. So that you can achieve your career aspirations. But definitely do the self-reflection, and if you don't think that it's the right feedback, move on.
And you know, you can ask other people, other mentors, because typically if you are demonstrating a behavior or there's something going on, it's not just one person that's seeing it, right? And so you can ask other people too.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Next question.
Hi, my name is Ray Edwards. I'm a managing account executive with Travelers Insurance. And, and my question is, what skills or behaviors do you consider paramount for individuals who are leading and or attempting to influence a team for the first time?
Oh, that's a great question. I thought you were going to say to hire folks. So, first time leading a team, I would say ability to listen and kind of assess whether it's in-person body language, feedback, you know, communication within the team. Because you could have, you know, the right, let's say it's a cross-functional team, the right skills in each of the different areas, and then there's no chemistry, right? And then at the end of the day, that's going to fall on you. So that's one, listen and assess. The second is ability to adapt your learning or your thinking quickly. So that, you know, the whole purpose of having this team for whatever you're trying to accomplish is to get different perspectives and things you might not have thought about. And so that team is watching you to see whether they're just the team to do the work because you brought them all together and you're going to tell them what to do, or whether you are going to participate and interact, sort of, for want of a better word, the servant leadership piece of how is she showing up, in this case she, to lead the team. And then the third is, as the leader, and I have to remind myself of this all the time as CEO, you have to talk less than other people talk.
That's great.
That's it.
Yeah. No, I would agree with all of that. Really, one of the things that I learned when I was a first-time manager, I had a very diverse team. So I had, people that, were very, very skilled and highly, it was a finance team, so highly analytical, and I had people that were very more process-oriented. And making sure that you listen, you understand the strengths of your team, you try to put your team in a position where you're playing to their strengths, and that becomes critically important as well, and set the vision for the team. So one of the things that in the roles that I've had, in addition to first assessing the team, is making sure that the team was very clear on what objectives we were trying to achieve as a team. And that clarity becomes critically important in order to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to deliver the performance that you're expecting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So Melissa, we have time for a couple more.
Hi, everyone. My name is Yolande Morris, and I work for Pfizer. I lead one of Pfizer's global digital platforms. So working in communications, and at times, in I think any female-dominated industry or industries that we have a lot of women at the top, sometimes it can create a culture, kind of a mean girl culture, or only one woman can survive. What do you do at your level to ensure that you root out that behavior, and also in the layers below you, that you create a culture of sisterhood?
Yeah. So I'll start. Estee Lauder is 83% female. Now that includes our sales, associates, up through. Obviously, as you get higher in the organization, it's less in terms of the percent female, but still quite high.
Right.
We started a few years back employee resource groups. And we had a men's resource group. We had, a lot of different resource groups, obviously African American and Hispanic. We started a women's resource group, myself and one of our global brand cluster leads, for that very reason. Because even though we're a company that is, largely female, making sure that we are supporting each other, supporting, very specific, needs from a female standpoint, being advocates for each other, being a voice, in terms of frustration on various issues, and the opportunity to reinforce the message that we should be supportive of each other. Two of the young ladies that are with me today are actually co-leads of the Women's Leadership Network. So they actually drive that message, through the organization. And we have how many women's leadership networks across the globe now? We have 9 globally, and opening, more markets, as the days go by. So that is an important way to really step out of the day-to-day and really talk about, how can we be more supportive of each other going forward.
And I would just add, where I sit, I do it through performance measurement. So my team, not only do they have diversity and inclusion performance goals that they get paid for, which makes it happen a lot easier, but they are also responsible for the people below them being successful. And so if you have a whole bunch of people in your 9 box that you're not coaching or helping or anything like that, you're going to have people on your team that have challenges that you need to either take action or help them. But once you've got that team, if they're not succeeding, then you're not getting paid, and that tends to work very well. But we do have a women's network too.
So when you're the CEO, you can do that. Even as the CFO, certainly whenever I do any recruiting, I make sure that there's a diverse slate. I challenge my team in terms of their recruiting as well, because one of the things that particularly as you think about getting to the C-suite. We have a pipeline issue. And you know, when I look at, I want to make sure that when I, you know, retire from this position, that there's somebody diverse behind me that can have the opportunity to take the position. That means that we have to have a pipeline throughout the organization in order to make sure that oftentimes what ends up happening in the C-suite is that if one of us leaves, we're often replaced by, you know,
Let's go back to the start.
go back to the beginning. So, yeah.
One last question over here, and then we're going to give you guys some time to do closing remarks, okay?
Good morning, ladies. Thank you. Danielle Hardy, Marketing Project Manager for Zappos.com. I just wanted to know, so this morning, Stacey Abrams emphasized the importance of communicating those ultimate goals. So for those of us early in our careers with C-suite goals, how do you suggest that we communicate that to our companies and our managers without, one, coming off as hasty, and two, devaluing the current and future roles that have to happen in between?
Great question. So first I would say what she was also talking about, and I don't have a spreadsheet, but she was also talking about communicating those to yourself, right? And so I have always, every year, and sometimes they're hysterical when you go back and read them, every year I have my short-term, my medium-term, and my long-term goals, and they're just in Word because, you know, I didn't put them in a spreadsheet, but, you know, I go back and look at them, same thing across business and personal. Once you know that that's where you want to be, if you are going to communicate that to anyone, you better know the why, right? So if you come to me and you say, I want to be a CEO, my first question is going to be, oh, great, why? And so if you can't answer that, you want to take time to make sure that you can. In terms of how you communicate across your career path, one of the things being in the C-suite is that you really can identify people who have leadership potential because they're asking the kinds of things that you're asking. So rather than going to somebody, especially if it's several steps up, you want to use that sponsorship or mentorship conversation to say, hey, and a little flattery helps too sometimes, I think. Hey, I see what you're doing, and can you tell me how you got there? What were the exact roles, you know, the P&L, the managing? Do you see those types of opportunities in this organization? Because as I think about, you know, what I want my career to look like, you know, a lot of the things that you are doing are a part of that. Could you help me with that? I know when someone says that to me, right, that what they're saying is, you know, I want to be in that seat, right? If it's somebody who is on my team, first of all, if they're on my team, I have identified whether, you know, they can sit in this seat or not, or some other seat, and they're there. But if, let's say, someone that works directly for my team, so they're SVPs, et cetera, I got a good sense, right, of how they fit in the organization. And at that point, then, yes, you're coming and saying, look, some people do not have aspirations. They really don't want to move from the role that they're in. At that point, I would expect those folks. And in fact, I do skip level meetings, and I ask every single time, where do you want to be 5 years from now? And I expect that person to be able to answer. And I always say, whether it's here at Adtalem Global Education or somewhere else.
Lisa said it well. The only thing I would add is understand, you know, the C-suite and the backgrounds of the C-suite. So understand what their skill sets are, because that will give you some indication, perhaps, of what the CEO values as important in a C-suite leader. The other thing is you need some, you know, and then ask, obviously, your manager, what are the, you know, this is my aspiration. What are the skills that I need to develop, whether it's more analytical skills, more strategic skills, whatever the case may be. The third is you will need, because the people in the C-suite obviously are chosen by the CEO, so you'll need some connection and some exposure to the CEO as well. And those things, will certainly be helpful in terms of having an opportunity. Yeah.
Ladies, there has been so much learning out of this week for everybody in this audience, and particularly for the ones who are here for the first time. But as each of these ladies leave and think about their own steady-as-you-go journey, what is the one thing that you would want them to take away from this conference?
You belong in the room.
Awesome. Well, it's hard to add to that, but I would say, you should feel, to Lisa's point, that you have the right to have the career that you want, and so understanding, what additional skills, that you might need in order to get to where you want to go. Certainly have the perseverance and the resilience to get there. You're not always going to have good bosses, good feedback, et cetera. You take all that in stride, and I think that certainly you will all have a terrific shot at having a great career. And don't get discouraged.
And whoever was standing at the mics, I will answer your questions if they were questions for me right here.
And she will be your mentor.
For a long
time. Ladies,
be careful what you ask for.
Ladies, you have been blessed with greatness this morning. Please help me thank Lisa and Tracy. Thank you so much.
Toast to you.